Welcome back to HFO Multifamily Marketwatch, your trusted source for information for apartment owners and investors. Multifamily Marketwatch is presented by Pacific Exteriors Northwest, a contractor specializing in siding and exterior envelopes and delivering exceptional quality and service for over 30 years. And by Gantry Incorporated, the nation's largest independent mortgage banking firm.
Welcome back to Multifamily Market Watch. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. Today we have with us Angela Wilhelms. She's president and CEO of Oregon Business and Industry. Thank you for coming by and stopping by and talking to our audience. Maybe give a little history of what Oregon Business and Industry is all about, and then we'll talk about this report on regulatory climate in Oregon. But maybe for people that don't know or aren't familiar, what's the background of the organization?
Yeah, OBI, or Oregon Business and Industry, is a statewide membership association. We're effectively your statewide chamber of commerce. Okay. We also are the state's affiliate for the National Association of Manufacturers and the National Retail Federation, so we do wear a couple of industry-specific hats. But all that boils down to we are a leading voice advocating for the business community across Oregon, businesses of all sizes, from all industries, from each of the 36 counties, when it comes to state level policy, legislation, regulatory environment, legal battles when necessary. That's what we do.
Okay, and it's state specific. You're not doing federal for the benefit of the state. It's more business, not negotiating, but talking to state leaders about business within Oregon.
Correct. We're advocating on behalf of businesses with state elected officials and policymakers about the things they need to be doing or not doing, oftentimes, to help create a robust private sector, a healthy business climate. And our focus is that state level policy work that okay. We advocate in. Sometimes we do local stuff, sometimes federal, but mostly it's state level advocacy. Yeah.
And I know OBI just released a report on regulatory climate in Oregon and what it means for businesses, big and small. Can you help us understand kind of the, what do you mean by regulatory environment, and then understand kind of the challenges with, for businesses within that environment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the regulatory environment is really broad. Once legislation or laws are passed, they then have to be implemented, usually by state agencies, and coming with those laws and rules themselves, or laws themselves, are then a whole host of rules, processes, procedures, guidelines that the government puts into place that creates this overarching regulatory framework. And it ranges from employment policy to how you file your taxes to can you get an air permit or a host of other things. So the regulatory environment is the broad set of ultimately the policies, restrictions, requirements, processes that businesses have to operate in. It's important to note, too, that, again, we talk about state level regulation and policy at OBI, yes. But businesses are affected by local jurisdiction regulations as well as federal regulations, sometimes international, sometimes maritime. So you've got a whole host of regulatory layers to contend with. And it can be in Oregon in particular. This is a really big struggle for businesses because the environment here is incredibly complicated. It's very costly to comply with. It changes all the time. Businesses have a hard time keeping up. And it becomes a barrier to growth, to innovation, to expansion. And all of that means it becomes a barrier to creating greater economic activity to help individuals, families, communities, even governments get the resources they need.
Join the HFO community and get weekly multifamily intel. Click to subscribe.
And I think in the report we ranked, 7th most regulated state in the nation, but trending towards 6th. And I think you highlighted some of the concerns or what the effect of that is. I know typically regulations are usually passed with good intentions, hopefully, between safety and fairness and health. Where does it become excessive and harmful, or what's the iteration of how that happens?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Regulations start from a place of good intention, trying to make something work or implement a law or protect, the environment or well-being. But where we really go awry in Oregon, again, is the breadth and complexity. So, one just anecdote, we did a survey of businesses, and of the more than 500 small businesses that responded, 74% of them said that regulations affecting them change so frequently they can't even keep up. The vast majority of respondents also said it felt like agencies were more interested in finding wrongdoing. So that gets us to this notion you're talking about in the report, where we talk about these excessive regulations. The report said, for example, that Oregon has about 179,000 regulations. That's a hard number to get your head around, but that's the number.
179,000?
179,000. That's Oregon specific. So all the states have the federal requirements. We have an additional 179,000. And 40% of those are excessive, according to the researchers who did this report. And they define that as duplicative, redundant, or burdensome. So they go beyond what's necessary to achieve a desired outcome, and they impose these additional undue burdens on individuals and businesses. We can get into some examples, but if you look by subject matter, by industry, for example, take metals manufacturing. We actually do quite a bit of that here in Oregon. And metals production and manufacturing as an industry has 8 times the number of regulations as the US median. Hospitals, 4 times the number. Restaurants and bars, more than 3 times the number. So, you have to ask yourself, why do these policymakers think Oregon businesses or Oregonians themselves need to be regulated at such a relatively high rate compared to every other state?
And when you bring this up, when you're doing your advocacy in the state, I mean, what is the response? Is it, I mean, that's when you actually hear that number and you start realizing that, wow, it's not just anecdotal. Here's a true number and where we rank in different industries. I mean, is the response out of Salem surprise? Is it, oh, that's what we want? I mean, how do we change that mindset there?
Yeah, good question. It's interesting, and obviously it depends. Interestingly, we've seen a lot more legislators from both sides of the aisle, both parties, if you will, kind of not being terribly surprised. I think there's a growing general awareness that the regulatory environment here is complicated and cumbersome. Legislators have even seen their own bills sort of get chewed on and then turned out in a regulatory environment where they don't look quite the same as they did when they were passed. So people are aware. I think where we struggle is the legislature doesn't necessarily know how to step in and kind of rein the agencies in a little bit, if you will, or help them understand how maybe not to go too far or take them to an excessive place. And so we really need the legislature to take seriously its role of executive branch and agency oversight. We also, though, need the executive branch to take seriously its role of restraint, of understanding the totality of what businesses are facing. And a lot of times they get into their own siloed lanes within an agency, and they don't realize that all of that work in every agency is compounding when you talk about the end regulated entity or the business at stake.
And so, is it more enforcement with the agencies, or is it, rules put in place and then how it's interpreted that's adding on to the regulations?
It's all of the above. I mean, we do see a lot of rules that are where, let's put it this way, where no one has asked the agency to do something or told the agency to do something, and they are coming up with new ideas on their own. There are also examples of things that aren't even about the policy, but how a rule is put into effect. Here's an example. In 2019, Oregon passed a new paid family and medical leave program. Mm-hmm. Oregon already had the Oregon Family Leave Act. And the way these two work in Oregon, if you have one employee, you have to offer the paid family medical leave insurance. That's for everyone. OFLA, the other one, doesn't kick in. You're not obligated as an employer until you have 25 employees. Those two programs, though, overlap, and they're in the same wheelhouse. They're both talking about, medical leave of a type. And yet, the definition of a year is different in the laws.
In both of them.
Because in each of them, and they're each, one is administered by one agency, one's administered by a separate agency. And the systems don't talk to each other. So if you're an employer with 25 or more employees, you're subject to both of these regulations. And even setting aside what burdens that might place on you to comply, you have this additional layer of administrative bureaucracy to contend with because, we couldn't get the definitions to align. We couldn't get the systems to align. That's when we think about some of the regulatory frustration, that's low-hanging fruit to us because you're not even talking about the policy. You're talking about the how it's getting done. Add in, just to make that example worse, once you have 50 employees, you're also subject to federal leave laws, so FEMLA. So, you can be a relatively small business and have 3 different leave laws you have to wrestle with. And the tracking document, the sample tracking document the state came up with it's a nightmare to look at. So that's a lot of what we're talking about to start with. Are there policies we'd like to actually change in regulation? Sure. But we just need these things to work better and be practically implementable, if you will, for compliance. That's, every dollar someone's spending figuring out that matrix is a dollar they're not spending on their employees' actual wages or benefits. It's a dollar they're not putting back into innovation and growth in the company. It's a dollar they're not, contributing philanthropically. So it gets pretty frustrating.
Like you said, it's a cost to the companies. It was, as Oregon is trying to be competitive in bringing companies in, these added costs, it's a tough hurdle to overcome. Mm-hmm. And the environment, as you brought up, seems to be, they just keep layering it on.
Yeah. There was a 6-month period last year. We haven't counted this year, but there was a 6-month period last year as we were gearing up to get this report done, where the state of Oregon had put notice out for 500 rules in a 6-month window of time. That volume may not seem a lot when you're any one agency doing one or some of those, but when you're a regulated entity affected by multiple agencies in their rulemaking, that's an extraordinary pace, and we've got to kind of figure out as a state how to manage that as well.
So it almost feels like we kind of resemble where California's going, but then you've got other regional neighbors, Idaho, Nevada. How do you see that competitiveness and new investments within the state if we're, from a regulatory side, having to compete with those other markets?
Well, thank you. You have hit on the word we use all the time here at OBI, which is competitiveness. We do not operate in an economic vacuum. We have to be able to compete. And when you think about the fact that we're the 7th most regulated state, admittedly, California is higher than us on that list. That probably isn't a surprise to people. Right. But Oregon represents just a little over 1% of the nation's GDP. We are not an economy of a size that can absorb the type of compliance requirements that other states can. Another comparison, you mentioned Washington. I think a lot of people would consider Oregon and Washington pretty similar when it comes to values around the environment, for example, and politically similar. Washington is about on par when it comes to the number of regulations on environmental policy with the U.S. median. So the U.S. median and Washington track. We are about 30 to 50% higher, depending on the specific bucket, than the state of Washington. And so you have to think, well, if we generally, I think, politically share the same values, and our voters tend to make the same types of decisions, and they're even a much bigger economy than we are.
Right.
What are we doing down here to just layer on and again, how can we get our arms around that? There's this competitiveness opportunity is so important, and we cannot just think of ourselves provincially in this little, isolated geographic bucket that is our border. That's not how the economy works. And companies know that. They're getting recruited regularly, and they're looking at growing elsewhere. And we have to figure out how to restore our place as a desirable place for workers and for capital investment and business growth.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, we've been kind of pounding that drum for a while. I'm curious, why do you think we've got to where we are? Is it inexperience? Is it agencies in silos without, communication, where they're, like you brought up, overlapping? I mean, why are we here and, Washington's not? I mean, is it businesses having a bigger, stakeholders are at the table during some of this stuff, where I think sometimes there's a feeling in Oregon, a lot of stakeholders are not allowed in the room when rulemaking's getting. I mean, what do you think from an organization is why we're here, and maybe helps outline some ways to get out of the position we're in?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a long time we've taken for granted some of our natural or inherent advantages as a state. And I don't just mean the beauty and the geography and the things I think that we all, I've got this picture of the coasts behind us, there's that. But for a long time we had a lower than average total effective state tax rate. That got eradicated in 2019. We're now above the average. We've talked about where we rank on a regulatory basis. We used to see natural population growth, both from births, but also immigration, because people wanted to come here, and that can help kind of cover up some other economic problems in a way that allows people in policymaking positions maybe to get comfortable and take for granted what we have. We don't have a lot of those advantages anymore. We have some challenges in place of them, and so we have to just fundamentally think differently. On the regulatory side, for example, there's great ideas. Are all of them right for Oregon? No, but we ought to be looking at some of them. For example, there are states that have a legislative committee that reviews rulemakings proposed by agencies to make sure the rules are in line with legislative intent and producing outcomes. There's an example actually out of Canada where for every new rule that gets put in place, some number of rules have to be repealed, which is a simple recognition that times change and you need to modernize and you need to constantly refresh. There are also examples about, some states are doing sunsets where any rule has to sunset automatically unless it is proactively reviewed and re-upped. And again, that's that recognition that things change and need to be reviewed. We're pretty long on ideas in Oregon. We're not terribly great at outcomes and accountability. And so we'd like to see some of these changes go into place that could actually help grab that good intention from the rulemaking and actually see it to fruition with outcomes, as opposed to just layering on and layering on.
And with, like you said, I think we brought it up. We got a little comfortable with where we were in terms of attracting and being competitive, and now the landscape has changed. Are you sensing that in your job going down and talking to legislators in the state, that they understand that, especially with a state that's so tied to income tax? If we don't have businesses and we're not competitive, it's really it's gonna hurt in the long run and the short run. I mean, what is the tenor change down in Salem, or I mean, I guess the question is, do you have some hope that the pendulum's coming the other way?
Well, of course I have hope. I deal in hope every day. And I'm inherently optimistic. I think that's part of the Oregonian spirit I was born and bred with. But it's a challenge for sure. I will say there is some newfound attention. It's hard to ignore when, for example, the CNBC rankings as a top place for business, we plummeted 11 places in 1 year. We're now 39th. We're 47th for business friendliness. Those are things that become hard to ignore. And you hit an important one, which is income is what creates income tax. And income tax is what lawmakers use to balance their general fund budget, along with corporate taxes. The corporate activities tax is not the general fund, but it's part of the pot. All of these taxes are predicated on healthy private sector activity.
Right.
And as they have grown a budget that has increased exponentially faster than inflation, and now are seeing job losses and talk of a recession from Moody's and others, I think lawmakers are really seriously beginning to look at what they need to do to ensure that they can balance the budget they want to balance. Now, we believe the best way to grow revenue is to create more jobs and put people in those jobs, earning wages and incomes for their families, and a byproduct is the income tax. Unfortunately, we also see ourselves in a lot of we'll just raise the taxes conversation, and that becomes its own sort of self-fulfilling spiral, much like the regulatory environment.
Which feels like is where we've been. It's just, but I get a sense in Salem there is a recognition as data is coming in and the lack of income tax that we can start maybe seeing some things loosening up on the regulatory environment. I sometimes worry about some of the within the cities and things like that where they kind of go awry. But my hope is that we don't want to say it has to get worse before it gets better. But now we're skinned our knee a few times, and maybe again we've got to change. We can't keep going status quo. It's just not going to work.
No, and I think an important thing to remember is that there's sort of this scales that you have going on. On one side is the businesses that are already here in the environment we already have. And as we've talked about, we're eroding that environment. We're making it harder. We're creating what the University of Oregon did a report they called these push factors, but we're creating more push factors for businesses looking to leave, and that leads to economic problems. On the other side of the scale, you have other states that are taking very seriously their competitive position, right. And they are actively recruiting. They are offering incentives. They are figuring out how to solve problems for businesses, and they are actively reaching in and trying to grab business growth and expansion away from Oregon. And that University of Oregon report called those pull factors. So you've got both sides of the scale. So even if, and the point there is, even if we solved one side and sort of said, you're right, the status quo is not working, we need to do better, we would still have a problem on the other side of the scale. So we have to solve for both.
Right.
And what we can't do is let either or both continue to erode. So it's even bigger. It's even a bigger problem and bigger solution than simply not maintaining the status quo.
No, definitely. Well, I want to thank you for all the hard work you're doing and your organization. I think part of the problem has been businesses in Oregon, need to have a loud voice, and we need people doing that down there. And for everything you've done, Angela, it's been very helpful. And if people want to get involved, they can go to the website below and get some information from you. And again, we'll keep pushing, and hopefully we start seeing some changes in the state, and we get the pendulum going the other way. So thank you again for sharing this information with our audience.
Well, thank you for giving us the platform, and yeah, folks can check out all of our research and data. Send us an email if they have questions or feedback. Really appreciate it. We've got a lot of work to do, but as I said, we're hopeful.
Definitely. All right, we'll see you again next time on Multifamily Marketwatch. Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information. HFO is a member of Global Real Estate Advisors. Learn more at GREA.com.
Love the insights? Tap the like button and click subscribe. It helps us bring more multifamily news straight to you.